And to our final session of the day, I'd like to hand over to Kathryn Courtenay-Evans, who's looking ahead to the future of workplace mental wellbeing in the US.
Welcome to the closing keynote session of the US conference. I'm delighted to spend the next few minutes with you. My name is Kathryn Courtenay-Evans. I am the Insight and Research Director for This Can Happen. I really hope you found the sessions over today interesting and insightful, and they've given you a look into some of the topics that some of the amazing people that we work with have been working on and looking to make changes for their employees. I particularly was really interested with the sessions around the neurodiversity and seeing the changes that people are making, but also hearing more about burnout. And burnout is something we hear a lot about from our colleagues and from different sectors. And it's something that really lots of organisations are thinking about. What can we do differently? There are obviously still lots of conversations to be had, and there's still lots to do. And we will be sharing with you lots more of these conversations in our future conferences. So what am I going to talk about today? Well, first, I'm going to share with you some of the work we've been doing with our global team, looking at how organisations are deciding where to put their resources in when it comes to putting together a global strategy, and some of the learnings that we've had from having conversations with some of our amazing clients who have been really kind to share with us some of the activities. I'm going to first of all set the scene on how we did it. I'm then going to talk a little bit about some of the global trends we've been hearing from our friends and partners around how they've been tackling their global mental health strategy. And then I'm going to just talk about some key differences that are coming out from the US market that you might find interesting, before summarising and moving on to very briefly what the future could hold, and posing some questions that maybe you can take away and think about for yourselves. So firstly, what did we do in this space? Well, myself and some colleagues did some work around what we call the scorecard audit. And this came about 18 months ago because some of our clients came to us and said, look, we're really struggling in how to decide what to do next. There's 100 priorities that we could be putting resources into, but we have scarce resources. And what we want to understand is, what should we focus on? What will make a difference? But also, how are we doing versus our peers? You know, if we do work in this space, will it make a difference? And are there any ideas that you can give us that will help us move the dial in this space and maybe potentially do something new? So what we did is, over the last couple of years, we've been doing lots of interviews with HR directors, wellbeing leads, head of departments, actually talking to them about what they're doing around their global mental wellbeing strategy and why. And then what we do is then analyse the results that we hear in these interviews and give them a report back. And what I wanted to do was basically share some of the trends that we've been hearing in these interviews, and to give you a flavour of what the people we've been talking to have been telling us. So to think about some of the trends, when you look at the strategy and people's journey with it, I think it's important to start by saying that actually there isn't one right strategy for an organisation, and everybody is on a different journey. And that really varies based on the maturity of your mental health strategy, what you've been doing, why you've been doing it, and also for how long you've been doing it. And whenever we talk to organisations, we always say doing something is great, and actually understanding why you're doing it is really important. But there is no reason why you can't change your direction or change your journey if you actually get some data back to say that there's something that you could do that would actually impact more people. And one thing that came out of all of the interviews was it was really interesting to think about where people's journeys started from. And often it was based on where the team sits within the organisation. So we know from our clients that actually mental wellbeing is owned by lots of different people within different organisations, and where they sit does vary greatly. So for instance, mental wellbeing in your organisation might sit within your pay and benefits team. In a colleague's organisation, it might sit within the HR team. Or if you're a big global manufacturing organisation, it might have started, understandably, be sitting within health and safety. Or it might be within your DE&I team. And all of that will have been set up at the time for a really valid reason. And the structure will have been set up and the resourcing, you know, to support the need that was identified at that time. But what might be interesting to think about is, does where the resource sit actually influence the actions and the way that you're actually managing your global wellbeing strategy? And I think from some of the interviews and the reports that we've been putting together, I think it'd be fair to say that it can do, and it can have impacts, positive and maybe sometimes negative. The other really interesting trend was looking at the difference in the dedicated resources that our organisations actually can and have put together to look after mental wellbeing. We talked to some really large global partners where they have a really lovely matrix structure of resources that might be there might be 3 or 4 people in a global team, there might be local leads, but there also might be some really clever use of third-party suppliers where they actually might provide a service, but they actually use their teams to support them and actually do outreach services, for example, or give them some data reports or some metrics to actually understand how effective they're being. And again, they're making best use of their resources to think about what they need to do. Another interesting theme that came out of the reports was thinking about the people that are actually leading the mental wellbeing strategy. What is their passion for it, and where does it come from? We often hear a lot of the senior people that get involved do it because they've got some lived experience themselves, and they actually want to share that, but they want to make it, they want to destigmatize mental wellbeing and actually make a change. They might also then go on and employ and put more resources in because they see the benefit. What's really interesting from larger organisations, particularly, is the challenge of getting global messaging out to different markets. And whilst you can have the best global team and the best global structure, sometimes the best will in the world messaging doesn't actually reach the right people, or it might not get there or be communicated in the way that you intended. And the challenge then is, if you've got global messaging, how do you make some of the local markets actually feel that their needs are being listened to and understood? Because the last thing you obviously want to do is, if you've decided a global pattern, is actually disengage some of the local people because maybe it goes against, what they feel should be happening in the market. So then you get the challenge of how do you come across as being authentic and connecting everybody together, particularly if you've got a very disparate organisation and you might have lots of different hubs or different people in different areas. So they were some of the general trends that people shared with us that they'd been tackling. And what I thought would then be interesting is to think about, well, does this change for the US market? And again, thinking about a lot of the US interviews that we've done and the US reports that we've written, what's really interesting is there is a stronger theme for the US clients is that actually pay and benefits is where mental well-being is predominantly seated within the global organization and within the US market. And what this means is that sometimes the way that the structure is put together and the resources that are put together tends to heavily more focus on things linked to pay and benefits than potentially maybe some of the softer aspects of mental well-being. And that's not to say that's wrong, but what it can mean is that sometimes people feel that other areas maybe aren't addressed as strongly as they would like it to. Something that was really interesting talking to American clients is the difference in the practices for working hours, that potentially working hours in the US market are longer than in other regions. And that can lead to disparity and the differences in actually people accessing resources and also feeling that they're treated differently. And one of our clients in particular was struggling with, well, how do we address this when actually there's law that says X, Y, and Z has to happen, but actually globally we want something different to be happening. How do we make it seem fair? Another really interesting theme that came out of the US market was the strength of the employee assistance programs and the benefit providers and the health assurance companies, and that the way that that interlinks with the mental wellbeing support. And again, a lot of organisations were using those as mechanisms to drive actually resourcing and to drive support. And it was really interesting to then look at the uptake of some of the EAP systems and say, well, if you feel that 50% of your messaging is going out via your EAP, but you've only got a very low uptake, how can you get to some other people that you might not be able to, if they're not accessing the EAP? One thing that we always like to do when we're talking to clients is think about metrics and data and how you can prove the return on investment. And we have similar conversations with lots of clients to say this is an area that they really struggle with, because collecting data is difficult. Reporting data is potentially even harder, particularly if you've got silos within your organisation where different pockets of interventions are held. And this was even more polarized potentially within some of our US clients, where data capture and confidentiality can be a real challenge, such as collecting reasons for mental health absences and actually being able to code it and use it. Often clients will say to us, well, our third party will hold this data. But then for data privacy rules, one person within the whole organization can see that, and it's not something that can be shared or put into a dashboard. So that then makes it really challenging for people to just, look at the data and actually drive action as a result of what's actually happening. Another thing that was really interesting was talking to clients about the level of resources they have and why those exist. And again, thinking about why those people were in the roles and what their driving passion was. And again, this really varied by organization. But there was a real feeling that actually having people in the right places and potentially at a more local level really can have a big difference and actually make employees feel that they're actually being listened to. So they were some of the trends within the US interviews and the scorecards that we did that were potentially a little bit different from some of the global. Um, but what I wanted to do to sum up was really leave you some thinking or some areas for consideration that maybe you could go away and think about within your teams and think about, has this maybe driven our journey with our mental well-being, and are we still on the right journey, or should we maybe be reflecting and thinking about how we could be doing something differently? So some of the questions that I thought might be quite interesting for you to think about was, first of all, what influence is the starting point of your mental wellbeing strategy having on the journey that you're on? So is it owned by pay and benefits? Is it owned by HR? And that's, not saying that's wrong or it's right, but actually, is that driving some of the messaging and the take up of the interventions potentially because of where it's housed? And potentially other options for you to think about different ways of actually getting more resources in different areas. The second question to consider is, if you do have a strong global strategy, are you actually capturing all the local initiatives and best market practice and celebrating them? Again, in doing the interviews, we've heard of some lovely examples, particularly in the US market, of where people have been doing something really differently, partnerships with charities, where, every day people are doing things that around giving back and sharing. This best practice sometimes doesn't happen just because people don't think to do it, or they don't think to actually share it upwards to the global team so they get sight of what's happening in their market. The other thing to think about is there any areas where you're not potentially in good alignment, where employees might be getting mixed messaging because maybe messaging coming from your EAP provider, for example, might not be aligned with your global mental wellbeing resources? The last thing to leave you with is there any scope for more senior lived experience to be communicated in the market? Because we know that actually having senior people that go out there and actually talk about their lived experience and talk about how important mental well-being as advocates of it has one of the biggest impacts that you can have within an organization. And we see this over and over again, where actually it destigmatizes the conversation and it helps people to feel more included and feel able to share their stories and hopefully ask for help if they need it. So that was all I was going to share with you today around some of the things that we've been hearing as an organisation. I hope you found that interesting, and if you've got any other questions or any points you'd like to ask, please do write in on the chat or talk to us individually. So I hope you've enjoyed the whole of this session. And if we've done our job well today, there's maybe one or two things that you've actually thought, I'm going to take that away and I'm going to do something different as a result of what I've heard today. And if you do, that's great. And I wish you all lots of success. Thank you very much indeed. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathryn, for summing everything up for us so brilliantly. And that is a wrap. So thank you everyone who's joined us today. I hope you'll agree that it's been full of variety and key takeaways. Do get in touch with us if we can be of any assistance. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your day. And we really hope to have you on board with us again very soon.